In just 3 days, 41 workers vanished without a trace. No ransom. No bodies. No justice. And what you're about to hear has been buried for nearly 150 years. This isn't fiction. This is the real-life mystery of the Beaumont disappearance, a case so dark, so bizarre, it was shut down before it even began. Welcome to Kentucky, 1876. A blistering summer. And at the Beaumont Plantation, once the pride of Bourbon County, 41 tobacco workers punched in for the last time, and then, poof, gone. Like they were erased from history. And here's the first twist, the local sheriff only investigated for 3 days before someone higher up said, "Close it." Now. No explanation. No follow-up. Just silence. But 149 years later, something unbelievable happened. Bullseye, we found the letters. Letters hidden inside the walls of the original Beaumont Manor, sealed behind plaster, untouched for generations. And what they reveal changes everything. But before we dive into the horror hidden in those pages, smash that subscribe button and drop your state in the comments, because this story stretches beyond Kentucky. This is a story America was never meant to know. Let's rewind. House with Flower Beaumont Plantation was massive, over 3,000 acres of fertile bluegrass soil, producing some of the finest tobacco the South had ever seen. Built in 1798 by French immigrant Claude Beaumont, this estate survived war after war, including the blood-soaked chaos of the Civil War. But after emancipation changed everything, most plantation owners crumbled. Not Jeremiah Beaumont. Claude's grandson was cold, calculating, and ruthless. While others lost their wealth, he adapted, switching to a contract labor system that offered former slaves wages and housing. Or so it seemed. Because what the letters exposed wasn't just an alternate version of history, it was a cover-up. A massive, orchestrated lie. According to these hidden documents, the workers didn't flee. They were taken. By whom? And why? One letter, written in shaky, panicked handwriting, mentions the pit beneath the shed. Another speaks of night rituals, strange chanting from the tree line, and how Jeremiah feared no man, because his debts were paid in flesh. Yes, you heard that right. Flesh. The deeper we dig, the more horrifying it gets. Historians had no idea that behind Beaumont's polished legacy was a blood-soaked history of sacrifice, secrets, and silence. Clap aboard and here's the final twist. When descendants of those missing 41 came to investigate the site last year, ground-penetrating radar picked up anomalies beneath the old shed. The same one from the letters. Now, a full excavation is being planned. So the question remains. What really happened at Beaumont? Why were 41 lives erased? And how deep does the corruption go? This is no longer a ghost story. This is a crime scene. And we're just getting started. The summer of 1876 was supposed to make Beaumont rich. Instead, it turned into a mass disappearance that haunts Kentucky to this day. Beaumont Plantation was booming. The tobacco crop? Perfect. The leaves? Big, rich, flawless. And Jeremiah Beaumont had assembled 41 workers, a fragile alliance of the South's most desperate and most hopeful. We're talking freed slaves, staying on the land they once served. Irish immigrants, fleeing famine and chasing survival. And poor white families, clinging to whatever hope was left after the Civil War. This wasn't just a workforce. This was a community, stitched together by struggle. Picture this. Neat rows of wooden cabins. Children laughing outside a small schoolhouse. A little chapel with Sunday sermons. And a general store, where workers spent the wages they fought hard to earn. On the surface, Beaumont was a model of post-war progress. A southern plantation turned into a beacon of equality and opportunity. But that was just the surface. And it was cracking. Because beneath all that order, something dark was festering. Scroll, here's where it gets personal. Samuel Rutledge, a former slave, now a trusted field supervisor. Patrick O'Sullivan, an Irishman who wrote letters full of hope to his sister in Boston. Martha Caldwell, a widowed mother of 3, finally finding peace after her husband's death in a mine. Thomas Vance, a mountain boy trying to escape the same fate that killed his father. These were real people. With real names. And their names would soon become ghosts in the county records. But here's the part the history books don't teach. In 1876, America was celebrating its 100th birthday. But Kentucky? It was still bleeding. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan were far from gone. They were active, organized, and violent. Anyone seen working beside black folks as equals? Marked, watched, threatened. And Beaumont's integrated workforce? It was a bullseye. Unnatural. Dangerous. A threat to the old ways. That's what newspaper editor Harrison Crow kept screaming in his editorials. He didn't just criticize the plantation, he declared war on it. Now ask yourself, what happens when a plantation becomes a symbol of progress? And hate decides it's time to burn that symbol down? Because we're about to uncover exactly how far they went to silence it. They woke up to work. By sundown, they'd vanish forever. This was the last normal day Beaumont Plantation would ever see. July 23, 1876. It began like any other morning on the Beaumont Plantation. Sunrise over mountains, dawn broke slow over Kentucky's rolling hills. Humidity draped the air like wet cloth. The tobacco fields shimmered with dew, and the mockingbirds sang as if nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. And no one knew it yet. That day, 41 men, women, and teenagers rose before the sun. Gathered their tools. Shared tired smiles. And walked into their final shift. Hammer and wrench Hatchfield supervisor Samuel Rutledge split the crew. 28 workers to the eastern fields, the heart of the harvest. 13 others to the curing barns, where the magic of tobacco turned to profit. By 7 a.m., every name was accounted for. Every hand was at work. And Jeremiah Beaumont? He was grinning. Riding his chestnut bay, he moved through the plantation, talking expansion, growth, and bigger profits. This harvest will set us up for years. He told Samuel, pride glowing in his voice. Every family here will see good money this season. But behind the fences, beyond the fields, they were being watched. Whispers had already begun. Neighboring plantation owners were seething with envy. Former elites, bitter from their war losses, viewed Jeremiah's integrated workforce as a threat. Night riders had been spotted. And people were talking about secret meetings, hooded men, and threats left on porches. No one wanted Beaumont to succeed. Because if it did, it proved that the Old South was dead. And there were those who would kill to keep it alive. Thermometer hash by noon, the sun turned brutal. Temperatures shot above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The workers pushed on, sweat soaking their clothes, the sweet scent of tobacco filling their lungs. Martha Caldwell laughed about sweat-seasoned leaves. Patrick O'Sullivan sang old Irish ballads, trying to lift spirits under the crushing heat. Then came the bell. Bell midday meal. All 41 workers gathered. They shared bread, drank from tin cups, found brief shelter in the shadow of the barns. It would be their last meal. Because what happened after lunch would be erased, denied, and covered up for over a century. The storm was coming. And when it hit, Beaumont would fall silent, forever. They were seen collecting their wages. Laughing on porches. Sharing cornbread under the trees. But by morning, all 41 were gone. July 23, 1876, the last normal evening Beaumont would ever see. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the workers gathered under the towering oaks near the main house. They ate simple food, cornbread, beans, cold buttermilk, swapping jokes and stories, unaware it would be their last supper together. But then, someone brought it up. Did you see those men on the road this week? Dark suits. Didn't say a word. Didn't look like buyers. Samuel Rutledge tried to brush it off. Probably tobacco scouts, he said. But something about their silence, their eyes, their timing, it lingered in the air like smoke. Sun with rays hash after the meal, the workers returned to the fields for the final afternoon shift. It was delicate work now, selecting only the best leaves for premium buyers. They toiled through the heat, through the golden light of sunset, until the bell rang one last time. 6:30 p.m. All 41 workers walked to the general store, where Jeremiah, as always, handed out daily wages. Notebook Thomas Vance, the young man who kept immaculate records, logged in his journal. Every worker accounted for. 6:30 p.m. No absences. The day was done. They walked back to their cabins. A few gathered on porches, laughing, fanning themselves. Children played. Someone strummed a tune on a broken banjo. Then night fell. And what happened next is still unexplained. Sunrise over mountains, 5:30 a.m., July 24th. The plantation bell rang for morning call. But no one came. Jeremiah rang it again. Still silence. He rode down to the cabins, expecting sleepy faces. Instead, he found emptiness. Doors were flung open. Plates with half-eaten food sat on wooden tables. Beds were unmade. Children's toys scattered across the floors. Letters still waiting to be mailed. But the people? Gone. All 41 of them. Vanished into the Kentucky night. No blood. No footprints. No answers. The fields were untouched. The barns undisturbed. It was like the earth swallowed them whole. Police cars revolving like Jeremiah sprinted to the county seat in Paris, Kentucky, heart racing. He demanded to speak with Sheriff William Danvers, a grizzled Civil War vet who had seen everything, except this. It's desertion, Danvers said coldly. Happens after every harvest. But this wasn't just a few men skipping town. Entire families were gone. Women. Children. Elders. And not a single soul had seen anything. This wasn't abandonment. It was erasure. And from this moment on, Beaumont Plantation would never be the same again. Because this wasn't just the story of 41 vanished workers. It was the beginning of one of the most disturbing and buried disappearances in American history. They didn't run. They didn't leave. They were erased. And what came next was a cover-up so massive, it silenced the entire county. Sheriff Danvers wasn't convinced. They left for better wages, he shrugged. Happens all the time. But Jeremiah Beaumont wasn't buying it. Why would workers vanish mid-harvest, the most profitable stretch of the season? They were weeks away from payday windfalls. And they left behind everything. Moneybag Martha Caldwell's life savings, $40 in gold, still hidden in a coffee tin under her bed. Scroll Patrick O'Sullivan's treasured letters from Boston, the only tie to his sister, scattered across the floor like trash. Long-dressed children's Sunday best, still hanging on pegs. Untouched meals. Half-lit candles. Doors open. Beds made. Gone. Without warning. The sheriff launched a 3-day search party, scouring the fields, the forests, the creek beds, the roads. And what they found would only deepen the nightmare. Horse tracks. Several sets. Leading to the plantation. But they'd been deliberately smeared, covered, as if someone didn't want to be followed. Inside some cabins? Chaos. Chairs overturned. Belongings scattered. Others? Peaceful. Beds undisturbed. Doors gently open. As if the people had simply faded from existence. But it was the tobacco fields that held the most disturbing clue. Ear of rice 3 acres, the best part of the crop, had been slashed and burned in neat, deliberate piles. The fires weren't random. They were targeted destruction. Someone wanted Beaumont to lose everything. And just as Sheriff Danvers was expanding the search into neighboring counties, he got shut down. Cold. Briefcase on July 27, in walked County Magistrate Edmund Hartwell, a man draped in wealth, secrets, and political power. "The investigation is over," he said, laying down a folder of documents. Official record: the workers violated contract and fled north. Stop sign. Danvers stood up, stunned. "That's a lie." "The evidence." Hartwell didn't flinch. "They were involved in illegal activity. Someone has come forward. It's done." He wouldn't name the informant. He wouldn't show the evidence. But just like that, case closed. The final report: all 41 workers fled to Ohio or Indiana in search of industrial jobs. But what about the burned fields? The valuables left behind? The horse tracks? Scrubbed from the record? What started as a harvest was now a haunting. And the truth? Buried deeper than the tobacco roots. Because when money, power, and politics join forces, disappearances don't get solved. They get erased. The sheriff stood in silence as Dr. Hartwell handed over the sealed files, documents that would never see the light of day. The court had locked the truth behind bureaucracy, and Hartwell made it clear, this investigation was over. Any deeper digging would only bring scandal to Bourbon County, and maybe something worse. But one man refused to let go. Jeremiah Beaumont, the plantation owner who had lost 41 workers without a trace, was devastated. The silence from the authorities was deafening, so he took matters into his own hands. He poured his fortune into finding the truth, hiring investigators from Louisville and eventually even the legendary Pinkerton Detective Agency. The Pinkertons chased ghosts across Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio. For weeks, they followed cryptic leads, old rumors, and false trails. But their final report was chilling. 41 people don't vanish without a trace, unless someone took extraordinary measures to erase them. Meanwhile, the cabins at Beaumont Plantation began to rot. No one dared live where the missing had once slept. Jeremiah couldn't bring himself to restart the business. The tobacco fields, once the pride of Bourbon County, turned to dust. And then the whispers began. Some claimed the Ku Klux Klan murdered the workers for racial defiance. Others whispered they'd been sold into slavery in secret mining camps. A few believed something even darker, that the workers had seen something forbidden, and someone powerful had made sure they'd never speak again. But then, 3 years later, a spark. A ragged drifter stumbled into a Bourbon County tavern, mumbling about a woman he'd seen in a Memphis boarding house. He described her in eerie detail, right down to the scar on her hand. Her name? Martha Caldwell, one of the missing. Investigators raced to Memphis. The boarding housekeeper remembered her clearly. She had stayed for just 3 nights, paid in gold coins, and kept asking about safe passage to Mexico. Then, just like before, she vanished into thin air. It was the only real lead. Ever. As decades passed, the tale of the vanishing workers twisted into local legend. It became a ghost story passed around kitchen tables and whispered in general stores. No graves. No answers. Just 41 names, gone. And that's where the mystery should have ended. Lost to time. Until 1923. That's when Margaret Beaumont, Jeremiah's great-niece and a Louisville schoolteacher, inherited the crumbling ruins of Beaumont Plantation. And what she would discover beneath the floorboards would shake the county to its core. Margaret thought she was simply renovating an old family estate. But she was actually uncovering a blood-stained conspiracy hidden for nearly 50 years. While peeling back moldy wallpaper in her great-grandfather's study, she found something no one was supposed to see: letters sealed inside the walls, letters from 1881, written by Jeremiah Beaumont himself, just days before his death. The deeper she read, the darker it got. Turns out, the mass disappearance at Beaumont Plantation wasn't random. It had started months earlier, when Jeremiah began receiving threats from a secret society known only as the Kentucky Brotherhood. We're talking about a shadowy group made up of elite landowners, corrupt politicians, and powerful businessmen, men who hated everything Jeremiah was doing. Why? Because he was running one of the South's first racially integrated plantations. And the Brotherhood wanted it shut down, or destroyed. One letter dated May 15, 1876, wasn't just a warning, it was a death sentence. Your experiment is an abomination. You will cease these activities immediately or face consequences. By June, they were watching his every move. His workers? Being tracked at gatherings. His fields? Marked as a threat to Southern tradition. And his name? Now on a hit list. Jeremiah tried to fight back. He begged the governor for protection. Reached out to federal agents in Louisville. But by 1876, federal enforcement of civil rights was falling apart. No one came. And then, a final letter, written to his brother just 2 days before the 41 workers vanished without a trace. Thomas, I fear I have made a terrible mistake. I tried to build something decent. But they are coming for me. And that's when everything unraveled. Margaret was about to uncover something no one was supposed to find. It started with a chilling letter, buried behind a rotting beam in an abandoned slave cabin. Its words? A final warning. I tried to protect my workers. I failed. If anything happens to me or them, look to the basement of the Hartwell house. Third Thursday. Every month. They call themselves patriots, but they are something far darker. And just like that, the real game began. Margaret dove headfirst into the county archives, chasing a ghost trail no one else dared to follow. She wasn't just piecing together history, she was stepping into a war that never ended. What she found? A web of fires. Vanishings. Burned contracts. Entire workforces scared into silence or wiped off the map. And in every single case, the investigations were mysteriously shut down. Same excuse. Same signature. Magistrate Edmund Hartwell. The same man named in the letter. But here's where it gets insane. While most landowners in Kentucky were losing everything during the economic collapse of the 1870s, Hartwell was buying plantations. Thousands of acres. 3 massive estates in just 3 years. It didn't add up. Unless he wasn't losing in the Depression. He was profiting from it. Then Margaret made the discovery that changed everything. A hidden compartment beneath Jeremiah's floorboards. Inside, a coded ledger. Dozens of pages. Names. Payments. Meeting times. Burned properties. Disappeared workers. It wasn't just a hate group. It was a machine. A full-scale criminal empire using racism as a weapon to protect power and profits. The Kentucky Brotherhood had been crushing integrated businesses like Beaumont. Not just out of hate, but to eliminate competition and steal the land for themselves. And they were winning. Until Margaret came along. With her teaching background, she began cracking the codes, one by one. She saw the pattern. She followed the trail. And she realized. They weren't just erasing workers. They were erasing witnesses. And now? They knew she had the ledger. In 1924, Margaret thought she was uncovering history. But what she found nearly got her killed. She was investigating a 50-year-old mystery. 41 plantation workers who vanished without a trace. And the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it got. First, anonymous letters. Stop digging, or else. Then, her apartment was broken into. Not robbed. Searched. Every document, every note, scattered, inspected. But nothing taken. Someone was watching her. Even her mail was intercepted. Letters from historical societies, gone. Researchers who had offered to help, vanished. But the real bomb dropped when Margaret hired help. A former police detective, Robert Hayes. Smart. Experienced. And he was onto something big. He tracked down descendants of the missing workers. He was finally connecting the dots. But just when it all started coming together, he was found dead in his office. Heart attack. That's what they said. But his Beaumont files were missing. And his secretary said 2 men in suits showed up the day before. They didn't give names. They just said the investigation needed to be shut down. Margaret should have stopped. But instead, she went even harder. Because now she knew something was being covered up. She didn't believe the workers vanished. She believed they were murdered. And she was going to prove it. That's when she found her breakthrough. An old man in Boston. Ezra O'Sullivan, the last living relative of one of the missing workers. Ezra had saved something for 48 years. A letter. Written by his uncle, Patrick O'Sullivan. Dated, July 20, 1876. Dear Mary, something evil is brewing here in Kentucky. Men are watching the plantation from the trees at night. Mr. Beaumont is nervous, something's wrong. Patrick wrote that some workers were ready to flee. But they stayed for the harvest. They needed the money. And then he ended with this. If you don't hear from me, tell the authorities I didn't leave willingly. Boom. The first direct proof that the workers knew something terrible was coming. They weren't just laborious. They were witnesses. And according to Ezra, that wasn't the only letter. He had more. Shocking. Graphic. Chilling. They detailed threats, shadowy figures on horseback, and warnings to stay silent. Margaret wasn't just uncovering a forgotten tragedy. She was exposing a mass cover-up orchestrated by some of the most powerful men in Kentucky. They erased records. Silenced witnesses. And now, they were coming after her. But Margaret didn't run. She kept going. And what she found next was even darker than anyone imagined. Margaret was getting too close to something dark. At first, it was whispers. Anonymous letters telling her to stop digging into the plantation's past. Then, her apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen. Just searched. Like someone was looking for something. Her mail? Vanishing. Important letters never arrived. And when she hired a private investigator, Robert Hayes, a retired cop, he started finding real leads. Families of the missing workers. Names. Places. Clues. But then, Robert Hayes dropped dead in his office. Heart attack, they said. Except, his Beaumont files were gone. Vanished. And witnesses said 2 men in suits had come asking questions the day before. Suits that didn't belong to the police. Margaret didn't quit. She couldn't. She tracked down an old man named Ezra O'Sullivan in Boston. His uncle, Patrick, was one of the 41 workers who vanished. And Patrick's final letter? Chilling. He wrote, "Something evil is brewing here in Kentucky. If you don't hear from me, tell the authorities. I didn't leave by choice." Then Ezra dropped a bombshell. 15 years after the workers disappeared, a stranger showed up at his door. He wouldn't give a name. But he claimed he witnessed the murders, on the night of July 23, 1876. He said Patrick died trying to protect women and children. And before vanishing again, the man left one cryptic clue. If you want to find where they rest, look where the tobacco grows tallest, where the soil is richest, where the limestone runs deepest. That was it. Margaret rushed back to the plantation. With a team of experts, she tested soil samples across the fields. And then, they found it. The eastern section. Soil abnormally rich in phosphorus and nitrogen, like something organic had decayed beneath it. The same field where crops had mysteriously died in 1876. She was this close to exposing the truth, when the son of Edmund Hartwell himself, now a powerful magistrate, showed up, with lawyers. With a court order. No more digging. No more searching. No more truth. But Margaret had seen enough. The puzzle was almost complete. And what she was about to uncover would shake Kentucky to its core. Margaret Beaumont was this close to blowing the lid off one of the darkest secrets in Kentucky history. But to uncover the truth, she needed evidence. Real, undeniable proof that would expose not just what happened to the 41 missing workers, but why they were murdered. And who had given the order. Just when we thought this mystery had reached its peak, boom! It exploded again. Because the horror brewing in Bourbon County was far from over. If you're watching this right now, pause and ask yourself, how deep does the rabbit hole go when it's guarded by blood, power, and silence? What Margaret found next shouldn't have existed. She was forced to stop her excavation of the plantation grounds. But fate handed her a different kind of shovel. His name? Elias Rutledge. A 73-year-old man with trembling hands and a story buried deeper than any grave. The grandson of Samuel Rutledge, the field supervisor who vanished in 1876. Elias had lived his entire life in the shadow of a secret passed down in whispers. A secret his grandmother made him swear on the Bible never to reveal. But on a freezing December night in 1924, as snow blanketed the streets of Paris, Kentucky, Elias broke the silence. Because some secrets grow heavier over time. And he couldn't die with the truth still buried. He sat across from Margaret in her dim hotel room. Eyes misty, voice shaking. And said, "My grandfather's gone. So are 41 others. But their killers' children still live in mansions built on blood. I won't carry this anymore." Then he told her everything. And Margaret realized. She hadn't uncovered the truth. She had only cracked the surface. Because what Elias's grandmother, Rebecca, had seen wasn't just murder. It was the cover-up of a massacre so orchestrated, so horrifying. It could only be described as a ritual purge. Rebecca had been away that night. In Lexington, caring for her dying sister. That absence saved her life. And cursed her with the truth. When she returned to the plantation on the morning of July 24th, she didn't find her husband. She didn't find the workers. She didn't find answers. She found silence. Too quiet. Too clean. And she knew instantly. Something unspeakable had happened. What she saw that day would haunt her family for generations. And now, finally, the world would know. But just when you think it's over, Margaret finds one more clue. And it changes everything. Rebecca thought it would be a normal morning. But what she found was hell on earth. She expected to see her husband and the other workers heading into the fields. Instead, there was silence. Not just quiet, the kind of silence that screams something terribly wrong. Cabin doors swung open like mouths frozen in terror. Children's toys were scattered across the dirt. Pots of breakfast sat untouched over cold fires. Coffee spilled across tables like people had vanished mid-sip. Something had happened here. Something monstrous. But Rebecca wasn't just anyone. She had survived slavery. She had survived the war. And she knew what death smelled like. Instead of panicking, she ran. Not away, into the woods. And then she waited. What happened next would haunt her for the rest of her life. As the brutal Kentucky sun climbed higher, she saw them. Not tobacco wagons. Freight wagons. Covered. Reinforced. And they weren't being driven by workers. They were being driven by strangers. And riding next to them? The men who ran the town. Magistrate Edmund Hartwell. Judge Cornelius Vandenberg. Mayor Samuel Preston. And, most chilling of all, Dr. Hiram Caldwell. The very people who were supposed to protect them. Now stained in dirt, and something darker. Rebecca held her breath as the wagons passed, 8 of them. Each one groaning under the weight of its hidden cargo. She couldn't see what was inside. But she could hear their voices. The northern route. Arrangements in Louisville. Make sure there are no traces left behind. They weren't rescuing anyone. They were covering up a mass disappearance. Rebecca didn't know what exactly they had done. But she knew this. The workers hadn't just vanished. They had been erased. And the men who did it weren't hiding in the shadows. They were the shadows. And now, they were heading into town. While Rebecca was the only one left alive who knew. But Rebecca's nightmare was far from over. Because just when she thought the danger had passed, another group of men arrived. And these weren't politicians in fine suits. These were men with guns, scars, and dead eyes. The kind of men who didn't ask questions. They just erased the answers. They moved like soldiers, not farmers. And they didn't come to investigate. They came to destroy. They marched cabin to cabin, tearing through every drawer, every bed, every trace of the people who once lived there. They didn't panic. They didn't rush. They knew exactly what to do. They burned letters, smashed furniture, and loaded up every scrap of clothing, every photo, every memory, into wagons that vanished into the trees. Then came the buckets. Rebecca watched in horror as they sprinkled a white powder across the cabins, the dirt paths, even the walls. Later, she'd realize what it was: lime. Used to erase blood. Used to dissolve bodies. This wasn't chaos. It was a cover-up. A machine of silence, fueled by cruelty, perfected over time. And then came the final proof. From the direction of the eastern fields, the men returned, carrying tools, covered in blood. They didn't even flinch. They fed the blood-soaked clothes into the fire. And as the flames roared, the air filled with a smell so vile, so unnatural. Rebecca knew. They were gone. Her husband. The workers. Every last one of them. Dead. And buried somewhere in those cursed fields. But the evil didn't stop there. Because these monsters weren't just erasing people. They were preparing to tell the world a lie. At exactly 3 p.m., a horse galloped in from the north. Jeremiah Beaumont. Face pale. Hands shaking. From his panic, it was clear. He didn't know. He thought he was arriving at a plantation. Instead, he walked straight into a mass grave. And what he'd do next would change everything. It started with silence. Jeremiah stood frozen, scanning the plantation for any sign of his missing workers, but the land was dead quiet. No footprints. No tools. No voices. Just empty fields, and dread in the air. Then, out of nowhere, Magistrate Hartwell arrived. And what he said next shattered everything. He claimed he already knew what happened. That vigilantes had threatened the workers, forcing them to flee in the middle of the night. He even held up documents, pre-written, signed, sealed, proof that they had broken their contracts and abandoned the job. But Rebecca was watching. And she knew it was all a lie. She caught the fragments. The way Hartwell carefully guided Jeremiah's questions. How the other men surrounded them, controlling the conversation. Subtle nods. Rehearsed phrases. Smiles hiding secrets. This wasn't a tragedy. This was a cover-up. And then, everything changed. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Rebecca felt something worse than fear. They knew someone was watching. She backed into the woods, heart racing, lungs tight, trying to disappear before they found her. But what she overheard next would haunt her forever. 2 men, rough and stained with soil, stood smoking near the tree line. Laughing. 41 bodies don't bury themselves, one grunted. Had to dig deep, real deep. But hey, the pay's good. Keeps the colored folks and their white friends in line, the other smirked. Nothing like a whole crew vanishing to make them shut up and stay scared. Rebecca froze. Her husband was one of those bodies. And now, she knew where he was. Lime'll take care of the evidence, they said. By spring, this'll be the most fertile tobacco land in Kentucky. Fitting, ain't it? The ones who got too proud end up feeding the crops. That was it. The conspiracy wasn't just real, it was monstrous. Rebecca knew the location, the eastern fields. She had the truth. But now, she had a target on her back. And if they found her? She'd end up buried beside her husband. Next spring, no one would know. Except the soil. And Rebecca, if she made it out alive. What if I told you a woman witnessed the burial of 41 murdered people, and had to run for her life just to survive the night? That woman was Rebecca. And the place was Beaumont Plantation, where the soil grew tobacco unnaturally tall, because it was hiding a mass grave. She waited in the woods, paralyzed with fear, until well after midnight. Then, without so much as grabbing a change of clothes, she slipped away like a ghost. No goodbyes. No evidence. Just one mission: survive. She didn't dare return to her cabin. She knew too much. They were probably watching. Instead, she walked, for miles, until she reached Lexington, blending into the background as just another woman visiting a dying sister. But she wasn't safe. Because the conspiracy didn't end at Beaumont. It was everywhere. Just days later, Sheriff Danvers launched an investigation. Rebecca thought, maybe, just maybe, it was her chance to speak up. Until they showed up. 2 men. Well-dressed. Calm. And terrifying. "We're just friends," they said. "But we suggest you forget what you saw." No direct threats. Just implications. They knew her name. Her past. Her every move. And then came the offer: money. A one-way ticket out of Kentucky. "Many are heading north," they said. "Maybe you should too." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Terrified and cornered, Rebecca disappeared again. This time to Cincinnati. New name. New job. Just a servant in someone else's house. But inside, she was haunted. Not just by the massacre, but by the silence she was forced to keep. Years passed. The world changed. But the horror stayed buried, literally. Until Rebecca returned. She wasn't just older. She was determined. And she had a mission: tell the truth. Piece by piece, she began building her secret archive. Detailed written accounts. Hand-drawn maps. Names. Faces. Hidden places. Everything she saw. Everyone she recognized. Every horrifying detail. But she couldn't go public, not yet. So she made a promise to her son. "One day, it'll be safe. When that day comes, you tell the world." The Beaumont massacre was buried beneath tobacco fields. But Rebecca buried something else: the truth. And one day, it would rise. She died in 1902, taking her secrets to the grave, but not before leaving behind a time bomb of evidence that would shake Kentucky to its core. Now it's 1924. An old man named Elias Rutledge stood in a dusty room, breaking his grandmother's silence, and with it, unleashing a flood of horror buried for decades. "My grandma saw everything," Elias said, his voice cracking. And she carried that weight till her last breath. Rebecca's story was more than just words, it was the key to one of the darkest cover-ups in American history. She had seen what no one was supposed to survive witnessing. And she didn't just remember, she documented. Maps. Names. Secret diagrams. Hidden timelines. All locked away in the basement of Elias's worn-out home like a vault of suppressed truth. And then came the jaw-dropping reveal: the Brotherhood wasn't just a group of thugs, it was an entire shadow network. Politicians. Judges. Wealthy businessmen. All united under one mission: eliminate the threat of equality. Their fear? That the Beaumont Plantation's integrated workforce might actually succeed, and show the South that racial oppression wasn't necessary for prosperity. So, they made a decision. A meeting in Louisville. May 1876. Brotherhood leaders from across Kentucky and beyond signed off on a plan to erase 41 human beings from existence. It wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous. It was a military-style operation, perfectly timed for harvest season, when the victims would be isolated and unguarded. And Rebecca? She saw the aftermath with her own eyes. The secret grave in the eastern fields. The men bragging about 41 bodies buried deep beneath the soil. And the chilling prophecy. Come spring, this'll be the richest tobacco land in Kentucky, fertilized by those who dared dream of something better. This wasn't just a crime, it was a warning. And now, nearly 50 years later, the truth was finally ready to erupt. In the dead of winter, 1924, Margaret Beaumont uncovered the darkest secret in Kentucky's history, and it nearly got her killed. A massacre. 41 workers. Vanished without a trace. But what if I told you, it wasn't random? It was strategically planned, during harvest season, when their disappearance would financially crush plantation owner Jeremiah Beaumont. Why? Because Margaret had just found out this wasn't the first time it had happened. It was part of a much bigger conspiracy. The location? A remote field, hidden from the main house. No roads. No witnesses. The perfect place for a secret mass execution. But here's the twist. This wasn't just about economics, it was racial, political, systematic murder designed to silence integrated workforces, Republican leaders, civil rights activists, anyone who dared to challenge the old Southern power. And behind it all, the Kentucky Brotherhood. A violent shadow organization that operated like a corporation of terror. Ledgers, minutes, rosters, meticulously documented murders as if they were quarterly profits. It was a business of blood. And now, thanks to Rebecca's hidden records, Margaret held it all in her hands. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. Because this wasn't just ancient history. The descendants of the Brotherhood were still in power, judges, police chiefs, politicians. And they were watching her. Every move Margaret made was a gamble with her life. Because they had already killed to keep this buried. Rebecca Rutledge? Silenced. Robert Hayes? Eliminated. And Margaret? She was next, unless she acted fast. So, she did something insane. She went full mission, impossible. Under freezing winds and total secrecy, she hand-copied every single document, the names, the maps, the burial site, everything. She used her job as a schoolteacher to secretly mail the evidence across the country. A former soldier in Indiana. A black pastor in Alabama. A progressive journalist in New York. Each one sworn to protect the truth if she disappeared. It was the most dangerous moment of her life. But Margaret knew. If she failed, 41 souls would stay buried forever. But now? There was hope. For the first time in nearly 50 years, the truth had a fighting chance. The grave had a location. The killers had names. The silence was cracking. And Margaret Beaumont? She wasn't just chasing history. She was declaring war on it. Stay tuned. Because what happens next will shake Kentucky to its roots. When Margaret realized the truth was too big for Kentucky to handle, she made a bold move that would change American history. She smuggled the evidence out of the South. To Boston. Chicago. New York. Philly. Not to lawyers. Not to politicians. To historians. Civil rights groups. Fearless journalists. People who couldn't be bought or silenced. But Margaret knew something chilling. Evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Why? Because the Kentucky Brotherhood owned the system. Local police? Corrupt. Judges? Paid off. State officials? Terrified. These weren't rogue criminals. They were the law. So if Margaret exposed them publicly, she could spark a war, and still lose. That's when the breakthrough happened. Margaret connected with a man who'd been fighting his own secret war. Special Agent Franklin Morrison. A quiet, relentless investigator from the Justice Department's Louisville office. Morrison had been tracking hate groups across the South for years, and no one had listened. Until now. When Margaret handed him Rebecca's files, Morrison's hands shook. This wasn't just another lead. It was the smoking gun. Ledgers. Meeting minutes. Names. Dates. Graves. And suddenly, it clicked. This wasn't just Kentucky. It was national. Dozens of groups. Across the South. Interconnected. Protected. Operating like terrorist corporations. Evolved from the Klan. But now with boardrooms instead of burning crosses. For the next 2 years, Morrison and Margaret worked in secret. They coordinated with agents in other states. They mapped out a spider web of terror. Front companies. Secret ledgers. Political allies. Burial sites. Every new lead brought danger. Every document, a potential death sentence. But they pressed on. What they uncovered was the most extensive conspiracy of racial violence ever discovered in U.S. history. And when the time came to bring it into the light, everything exploded. Coming up next, the arrests, the betrayals, and the one final twist that no one saw coming. In 1926, something happened that shocked the entire nation, and it all started with a hidden massacre, secret ledgers, and a decades-old conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. This isn't just a story about murder. It's a full-blown cover-up so massive that 47 of the most powerful people in Kentucky, judges, county officials, and elite businessmen, were suddenly indicted. But how did it all unravel? Let's rewind. The Beaumont massacre, what seemed like just another forgotten tragedy, was hiding the full truth of a terrorist empire. But thanks to the iron will of 2 women, Rebecca, who documented everything at great personal risk, and her great-niece Margaret, who risked her life to uncover it decades later, federal prosecutors were handed the ultimate smoking gun. We're talking hundreds of murders, thousands of threats, and a full-blown corruption network that controlled courts, elections, and law enforcement across the South. And then, the trials began. In 1927, courtrooms in Louisville, Lexington, and Frankfurt turned into battlegrounds. The entire country watched in disbelief as hidden truths spilled out into the open. Post-Reconstruction terrorism wasn't just rumor, it was systematic, organized, and fully protected by the law. But here's the real twist: the son of one of the massacre's architects, Magistrate Harrison Hartwell, flipped. He cracked under pressure. And when he took the stand, what he revealed stunned everyone. He confessed that his own father had orchestrated the massacre. That it had been months in the making. That it was designed to send a brutal message to other integrated workforces. And worst of all, the Brotherhood had already written legal cover stories before the killings even happened. They planned to make the workers disappear without a trace. But Hartwell didn't stop there. He confirmed everything Rebecca had written decades ago, and then dropped a bombshell. The Brotherhood kept financial records, detailed ones, of every payment, every hit job, every bribe. Let that sink in. They weren't just murderers. They were accountants of evil. This wasn't just a trial. It was the takedown of a shadow government that had operated in plain sight. And it was all because 2 women, 2 brave, relentless women, refused to let history stay buried. The Brotherhood thought they'd erased their crimes forever. But the truth came back with a vengeance. And justice? Justice finally knocked on their door. They treated murder like paperwork. Every bullet, every body, every act of terror, meticulously documented like corporate expenses. For the Brotherhood, slaughtering 41 innocent workers wasn't a crime, it was a business investment. One that would scare every other integrated workforce in the South into silence. But when the trials exploded into public view, the real horror began to surface. Judges? Bought off? Sheriffs? Silent. Politicians? Paid to protect murderers. Kentucky's justice system had been hijacked by the very people it was meant to stop. The Brotherhood had its claws in every corner of power, turning law into a shield for violence. But amidst the courtroom chaos, something extraordinary happened. Margaret. She wasn't done. Armed with Rebecca's century-old maps, she joined federal teams to find the unmarked grave, the final resting place of the 41 workers no one was supposed to ever find. And then, they found it. A mass grave, hidden in the eastern fields of the Beaumont Plantation. A pit of silence, engineered to bury truth forever. But now, the silence was broken. Archaeologists uncovered every set of bones with reverence. They examined personal items, matched dental records, and restored names to the nameless. For the first time in a century, these men were seen. They were buried again, but this time with honor. A cemetery in Paris, Kentucky, now holds 41 headstones, each engraved with a name the Brotherhood tried to erase. A towering monument stands above them, whispering to history. We remember. We won't forget. And when the memorial service began, hundreds came. Descendants, townsfolk, civil rights leaders, all gathered to honor men who died for equality, long before it had a name. Margaret Beaumont stood before them all. She could have claimed the glory, but she didn't. She pointed back to Rebecca Rutledge, the woman who risked everything to tell the truth before anyone dared to believe it. And justice? It finally spoke loud and clear. 31 out of 47 conspirators were convicted. Some got 10 years. Others? Life behind bars. But the real sentence? The truth is out. Their empire of silence is dead. In the ashes of a massacre came a mission that would shake America to its core. 41 workers, slaughtered in silence. A brotherhood so powerful, it crushed justice with its bare hands. But one woman, Margaret Beaumont, refused to let them disappear. And this is how she fought back, and changed history forever. After the brutal truth of the Beaumont massacre exploded into public view, the courtroom became a war zone. Defendants were dropping like flies. Some died mysteriously before trial. Others vanished. Gone without a trace, fleeing the state to escape justice. But the Kentucky Brotherhood? Dead. Obliterated. As an organization, they were dismantled piece by piece, their influence shattered. But their ghosts lingered, in backrooms, boardrooms, and ballot boxes across the South. Then the real bombshell dropped. This wasn't just a massacre. It was a national conspiracy. The Beaumont case caught the attention of the entire federal government. It ignited a firestorm that forced Washington to confront the dirty underbelly of Southern terrorism. Congress was shaken. New civil rights laws were passed. And like dominoes, other states began to fall. More secret groups. More conspiracies. Hidden networks of power exposed. The Beaumont case had cracked open the lid on something far bigger, and far more dangerous. But for Margaret? This wasn't enough. She didn't just want justice, she wanted memory. She spent the rest of her life making sure the world never forgot what happened in those fields. She launched the Beaumont Memorial Foundation, turning tragedy into transformation. Explosion symbol scholarships for descendants of the murdered workers. Explosion symbol funding for investigations into other post-Reconstruction atrocities. Explosion symbol a historical archive packed with chilling testimonies, raw evidence, and, most importantly, the voices of the dead. This wasn't just about facts. It was about faces. Stories. Families torn apart. Lives stolen. Children growing up with ghosts for parents. And Margaret? She didn't hide behind books. She hit the road. Universities. Schools. Town halls. She told the story of the Beaumont massacre to thousands. She dragged it out of the darkness and into the heart of American history. And the finale? It's jaw-dropping. The Beaumont Plantation, once soaked in silence and blood, was transformed into a living memorial. Here of rise the workers' cabins? Now powerful exhibits, each one telling a victim's story. Tree the eastern fields where bodies were dumped like garbage. Now a garden of names and peace, where people walk, remember, and heal. And the message etched into the foundation stone? Truth has roots deeper than hate. This wasn't just a story. This was a resurrection. Margaret didn't just avenge the 41. She brought them back. She made the world listen. And she dared history to never look away again. For decades, the Kentucky Brotherhood operated in total darkness, its crimes buried beneath layers of fear, silence, and corruption. But when the Beaumont massacre came to light, the entire machine of evil began to unravel. Many of the accused never made it to trial, some mysteriously died, while others vanished without a trace, fleeing across state lines. What remained of the Brotherhood was shattered, its grip on the region broken. But the fight wasn't over. The horror of Beaumont ignited a fire across the nation. Federal authorities could no longer ignore the organized terror boiling beneath the surface of the South. New laws were passed. Investigations erupted in other states. More conspiracies. More arrests. Justice was finally chasing the shadows. But in the heart of it all stood one woman, Margaret Beaumont. She refused to let the victims be forgotten. Instead, she turned her grief into a mission. Margaret founded the Beaumont Memorial Foundation, offering scholarships to descendants of the slain and funding the uncovering of hidden crimes that others were too afraid to touch. She built an archive, an unbreakable fortress of truth, where every letter, every photograph, and every haunting testimony lived on. But it wasn't just about records. It was about people. Their names. Their stories. Their pain. Margaret traveled across the country, standing before crowds, demanding that Americans remember. She didn't just speak, she fought. She teamed up with researchers, hunted down more conspiracies, and exposed the monsters hiding behind polite society. Then came the transformation. The once blood-soaked Beaumont Plantation became sacred ground, a memorial and education center. Visitors could walk through the very cabins where workers had once slept, see their faces in the exhibits, and feel the weight of history pressing against the silence. And out in the eastern fields, where the bodies had once been buried in secret, now stood a garden. Peaceful. Beautiful. Every name etched into stone. Every step marked with stories. But this story is not just about the past. It's about the legacy of courage. About how one schoolteacher, Rebecca Rutledge, risked her life to document what others refused to see. About how Margaret Beaumont tore through lies and threats to bring light into darkness. It's about the unstoppable force of truth, about how even the most powerful conspiracies can collapse when ordinary people choose to stand. Because evil thrives in silence. But justice? Justice screams. Imagine standing on the very ground where 41 innocent workers were slaughtered, not by foreign invaders or criminals, but by a secret American conspiracy determined to silence the truth. This is not just history. This is a real-life horror story, and what you're about to hear might just change how you see justice in America forever. Right now, there's a memorial, quiet, solemn, but its story. Explosive. Behind its peaceful facade lies a brutal chapter buried for over a century. The Beaumont massacre wasn't just a crime, it was a cover-up orchestrated by the Kentucky Brotherhood, a shadowy group that ruled through fear, corruption, and blood. But here's where it gets insane. Inside the Beaumont Memorial Center, thousands of never-before-seen documents wait in the archives. Court records, personal diaries, letters drenched in desperation, they don't just tell a story, they scream the truth. And at the heart of it all? A mission to connect past and present, showing that the fight for justice didn't end in 1876, it still rages on. These 41 workers weren't radicals or rebels. They were dreamers. Dreamers who believed in a better future, one where race didn't determine worth, where hard work earned dignity, and where children, no matter who their parents were, could hope. But their dreams were shattered, in the blood-soaked fields of Beaumont Plantation. And yet, something survived. Their vision. Their sacrifice. Their legacy. It now fuels educational programs, civil rights activism, and historical research that reaches into the darkest corners of American history. What began as murder has become a movement, and thanks to the bravery of women like Rebecca Rutledge and Margaret Beaumont, the truth didn't die, it fought back. But here's the real question. White right pointing backhand index. Was justice truly served? White right pointing backhand index, or does the power of the Kentucky Brotherhood still echo in today's broken systems? White right pointing backhand index, and what can you do to ensure that the voices of these 41 are never forgotten again? Because this isn't just their story, it's ours. Explosion symbol. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this justice, or just damage control? If this story shook you like it shook us, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell, and share this with someone who needs to know what really happened. Because the truth matters, especially when it's been buried this deep. See you in the next one, where we uncover even darker secrets hiding in the shadows of American history.